So here we are, you wanted it, you've asked for it, and here I am, I came out with a tutorial on the EU knowledge test, which if you're preparing for EU competitions such as the recently published AD5 competition, but not only that, is going to be very useful. In fact, these EU knowledge tests are more and more used in the context of AD level competitions, not only AD level competitions, to be frank, also AST level or also competitions for contract agents. And you're gonna see these type of questions more and more in the context of EPSO tests, or in any case, tests to access the European institutions. So if you don't know me, my name is Frederick. I'm a lawyer based in Brussels. I've been working for 15 years across different countries, and in my channel, I focus on my journey as an international lawyer on EU careers. In fact, I've been working in the EU bubble for 12 years, and specifically in the EU institutions and in the European Commission for the last 8 years. And I do my best to make this type of path, this type of journey, more accessible to those who don't have the knowledge, and I try to share my knowledge, what I learned during all these years working internationally and especially in the EU bubble. So I hope that this is going to be useful for you. So how did I structure this tutorial? I prepared 12 EPSO-style questions covering EU institutions, policies and programs. As you see, I called this tutorial EU Knowledge Test, EU Policies and Institutions, because based on my experience, and I can tell you I did many of these tests over the years, the EU Knowledge Test is going to cover mostly EU policies, so policies carried out and put in place and implemented by the EU institutions, and also the most important information about the EU institutions, the 7 EU institutions which you should know which they are, and anything which relates to the legislative process, to the competencies of these institutions, and to the role of these EU institutions. Just want to stress out that these 12 EPSO-style questions that I came up with are questions that I encountered in real life during my previous tests. In fact, as I said, I set many tests to access the EU institutions, and at one point I also managed to become an EU official. And during the years, I took a lot of notes. So I have a lot of materials about previous questions which I had in similar tests, previous questions that I was asked. And with this, I don't want to say that these questions that I'm going to show now on the screen are precisely the questions that I got in the past. In fact, I have to stress that this is my recollection of previous questions that I had, and then after each exam I was noting down my recollection. So I can't say with certainty that the way that the questions are phrased in the context of this tutorial are exactly like and precisely how I was asked those questions in the past, but for sure I can say with almost certainty that these are topics that are very likely to come out in the context of these tests, and I tried to make the questions as close as possible to what I recall I was asked in the past, including on the possible answers. So I'm gonna go, as I said, through these 12 EPSO-style questions that I came out with. Whenever we will go through these questions, my advice is to pause the video for each question. You choose your answer. You pause the video for like, let's say 1 minute, because during the actual test you will be under time constraints. And I think that normally you'll get 30 questions in 40 minutes. This is for the AD5s, but for other EU competitions you may get less time, or you may get less questions. I think that for AD7, sometimes they do 30 questions in 30 minutes. I mean, it very much depends. As I said also in a previous video, in a previous tutorial, EPSO and the EU institutions, they adapt tests to different needs and to also the different seniority of the officials that are sought. So it very much depends, but pause the video for a few seconds, read the question carefully, and then have a look at the possible answers and choose the answer. And then I will go through the options that I came out with, and we will choose the correct answer together. I will show you also the thought process that I go through, and I also will show you the way that sometimes the different options are phrased, because that is also quite tricky when you do these tests. And I can tell you there are ways to identify the possible right answer, like at least to reduce the options to a couple. And that is, one of the things that I would like to share also at the end of this tutorial, at the end of this video, because I also identified 3 pro tips that I would like to share with you based again on my experience, and that can, in my view, improve considerably your score in the test. At least they did to me in the past. And I mean, you have to come to terms with the fact that these tests are highly selective. They are highly competitive. It's a competition. It's not a passing exam. You don't have to get, pass marks. You are competing with other people. So you also have to get into the to the idea that, and accept the idea that you sit these tests also to improve for future tests, possibly. It's not guaranteed that you're going to succeed after the first test. So at least my thought process when I started sitting these exams, because I realized that this was the career that I wanted to pursue, was let's try to learn as much as possible from each of these tests. And also, after doing them, note down the topics like I did that came out during the test. So maybe you will learn even more. And for the next test, you know that certain topics are likely to come up much more often, and you learn more and more because that's also, the kind of approach that you have to go through. So let's maybe go through the test, but before that, I would ask you to please like the videos that I produce and subscribe to the channel, because I'm investing a lot of time, and a lot of you have asked me to come up with these videos, with these tutorials about exams that I did in the past, and especially in relation to the 85 video which I recently published. I received a lot of requests from people who want to know more, and who also approached me to be guided in the context of these exams. And I'm very much grateful for all the interest that you're sharing, and I'm doing my best to share as much as I can, but understand that it's not possible to do too much and to liaise with each and every single one of you. So this is videos like these ones are like my giving back. But please, if you like, comment and subscribe to the channel, this is also your way to support the channel and incentivize me to produce more and more content to hopefully help you in this journey. So moving to the questions, which I will now be doing, let's look at question 1. And question 1 is, where is the European Defence Agency located? And I think that also in a previous video, which I shared, I covered the point about trying to understand as much as possible about EU agencies, because there are many EU agencies. There are many EU agencies, and if you haven't done it yet, maybe you can pause the video at whatever moment you prefer and try to think through the answers, but not for so long, because as we said, you have time constraints. You have 4 options: Paris, Vienna, Stockholm, and Brussels. So going back to the point that I was making, you have several EU agencies. These EU agencies, they deploy sometimes EU programs, and the agencies, they support the EU institutions in certain policy areas or even policy priorities sometimes. And you may know sometimes, what I would do when I go through these questions is also start thinking logically what the different agencies are about, and also what the different priorities in a given moment of time are for the European institutions, for the European Commission, who is the institutions that typically proposes the EU legislation. And also think about one thing, because it's true that there are several EU agencies located across the different EU countries, but if you go through the list of these EU agencies, and you will find this list online if you Google it, and maybe I can also share it in the comments of this video or in the video description, I can share the list of these EU agencies, you will realize that you have a lot of agencies in certain member states, for instance, France, and you have Paris here. France hosts several EU agencies, but I mean, it may be quite, maybe easy, like to think, and sometimes you may think that, the easy answers are not the right ones, but most, let's not say most, many EU agencies are actually located in Brussels. So think about that, because when you have questions like this one, that is also like a type of thought process that you can go through. You have many agencies in Brussels. You have agencies about research and development. You have agencies about innovation in Brussels. And you also have, in this case, an agency which deals with defense policies. So I will remove the black color. Oh, and I also removed in my previous work the correct answer, but the correct answer in this case is D, and it's actually very close to where I live here in Brussels. Funny enough, the European Defence Agency supports the cooperation between EU member states in developing defense capabilities, procurement, and research project in the defense sector, and it works closely with the EU's common security and defense policy structures. And like many bodies, as I said, with EU external action and defense, is located in Brussels, near the EU institutions. So, as I said, it's very important to know sometimes not only the agency locations, and go through the list if you have the time, but also like what each agency deals with. Because, for instance, you have a so-called maritime agency, just to give you an example, in Portugal, in Lisbon, but that is the Maritime Safety Agency. So you may want to know what type, what the remit of these agencies is. And for instance, it would not be sufficient to know that there is a European agency in Lisbon and in Portugal. You may also want to know what type of policy area the agency deals with, and even more precisely, in the case of the European Maritime Safety Agency, it's like maritime safety. But you may want to try and understand more and more what the agencies deal with. So moving on to question 2. This is an interesting question, I think, because it asks about the specific date. And you will get questions with dates. You will get quite many, actually, if I recall correctly, especially treaty dates. And amongst the possible options, I included Treaty of Rome Day, because that is, I can tell you, and my memory is quite good in that respect, that I got a question in the past about the date that the Treaty of Rome was signed. And I remember, if I'm not mistaken now, out of my recollection, it was end of March 1957. But go and check it out. I don't want to guarantee it now. But 9th of May, of course, if you gravitate around the EU bubble and Brussels, you would know what 9th of May means. And 9th of May is an important day here in Brussels. It's a bank holiday. EU institutions are open. You can go and visit EU institutions because it's amongst the possible options. It's the Europe Day, the anniversary of the Schuman Declaration. But as I said, I think it's important. You don't have to. The thought process, I think, is it's good if you know what the 9th of May is, but try to link this information to something useful. For instance, you may go and check why the 9th of May is Europe Day, and you will discover that Europe Day commemorates the Schuman Declaration. And if you come to Brussels, you will see that there is also a roundabout, again, close to where I live here, which is called the Schuman Roundabout. And who is Schuman? Schuman was the French foreign minister, Robert Schuman, at that time, in 1950. And this French foreign minister, at the time, he proposed this Schuman Declaration, where he suggested to place the French and German coal and steel production under a joint authority. And that joint authority was this European steel and coal community, which then became the European Community, and then what we know as the European Union. So it was the very first declaration which led to the formation, to the creation of the EU as we know it now. So the creation of the European Coal and Steel Community is an important step in the EU process. The first step, we can say, in the EU, in the European integration. So it's good to know, I think, that EPSO often tests symbolic milestones. And I refer to the Treaty of Rome Day, and for instance, you can think about the EU Enlargement Day, Charter of Fundamental Rights Day. To be frank, I mean, I came out with this option. I don't think I ever saw any question on Charter of Fundamental Rights Day, but for sure you maybe asked something about the Charter of Fundamental Rights. So when you don't know anything, when you don't know stuff, go and have a look, even if it's the incorrect answer of an option, right? You're assessing, but go and have a look, and you will enrich your knowledge. You will understand more and more, and in the end, you will also be able to exclude some options, because that is also something useful. For instance, okay, of course I know that the 9th of May is the Europe Day, but since I also know that, the Treaty of Rome Day was around end of March, 1957, if I'm not mistaken, as I said, I'm excluding already an answer, and I'm increasing my chances to get the correct one. So, moving on, now, we move to so the correct answer, again, as I said, it's B. We move to the third question. And this is a question about the legislative procedure, and more specifically about the ordinary legislative procedure. And I would suggest you to have a look at all the types of legislative procedures that we have in the, as regards, the adoption of EU legislation, because that is important, and also what institutions are involved, especially because in the options, and you will see it like in the options that I came out with, but also you will see it in any EPSO test, you will get names of various institutions, sometimes many similar names, like, for instance, if you look at the possible answers here, you will see European Commission, European Parliament, Council of the European Union, European Council, and Council of Europe. Do you know the differences between all these institutions? First of all, you should know that there are some EU institutions, and there is like one entity which is not an EU institution. And I would look it up if I were you, because that is very important. You should know what the seven EU institutions are. First of all, because they're laid down in the treaties, and I think that's quite some significant information. And secondly, because if amongst the options, again, about excluding, you are mentioned, one of the options mentions the name of an institution which is not an EU institution, you already exclude one of those answers. And here, I don't want to tell you, because I want you to do the work now. There is an entity which is not an EU institution. Anyway, going through the answers, have a look, pause the video if you like, and try to go through a thought process to understand, because I think it's very important to understand, to really think through the questions and think through the answers before, trying to respond, especially if you don't know the answer by heart. But, you should know that the three institutions that are involved in the ordinary legislative procedure and in general in the adoption of EU legislations are typically the EU Commission, the European Parliament, and the Council of the European Union, and that the EU Commission, its main role is to propose the EU legislation. Whereas the adoption of EU legislation is typically left to the Council of the European Union and the European Parliament. And I'm sorry, here I'm trying to get rid of the black color. So the correct answer would be B. B is the correct answer. Whereas the European Council is another institution, like it's typically the institution which gives impetus to the European legislation. I mean, it's like composed of the heads of state and governments of the EU member state, also the president of the European Commission, but it doesn't participate to the adoption, let's say, in a strict sense, of the EU legislation. So here it would be the European Parliament, as I said, and the Council of the European Union. It's on the basis of the proposal by the Commission, as I said, and you should also know that the European Parliament represents EU citizens and the Council of the European Union represents member states. So, as I said, EPSO often tries to create confusion between similar names, like the European Council, which sets the political direction, the Council of Europe, which is a separate international organization. But okay, now I told you, but okay, I think you should go and check it out. Let's move to the following question. Question 4. So, which EU program focuses exclusively on environment and climate action? And here we are moving to EU programs. And I included different types of programs. EU programs that deal with a wide array of issues and policy topics. First of all, because I think it's very important to know what these programs are about. So again, I invite you to do the homeworks here and to go and check what each and every single one of these programs is about, especially because you have different versions of some of these programs such as Horizon Europe or like Erasmus. There are different versions. They were revamped through the years and updated and improved, so to say. So it's interesting also to see the evolution, which goes hand in hand with the political mandate and with the priorities of the European institutions and the European Commission in a certain historical moment. But here I would focus very attentively on the question, and the question is saying exclusively, and pay attention to adverbs. When you have adverbs in the context of EPSO questions or like EU institutions competitions, adverbs can be very tricky, in good and in bad. I mean, they can help you in good and in bad. And here the question is saying exclusively. Why? Because if you go and check, you will realize that I would say at least 2, if not 3, of these programs, they focus on environment. They may focus on environment and climate action. I mean, these policy issues, they can be covered by, I would say, not less than 2, possibly 3. But there is only one which focuses exclusively on environment and climate action. And that is the program so-called LIFE. I will now delete the black highlight. And it's the program LIFE because the program LIFE is an EU funding instrument dedicated specifically to environmental protection and climate action, and it finances projects related to typically biodiversity, natural conservation, circular economy, sustainability, climate mitigation, which are very important topics nowadays. That sustainability is particularly important, and especially after the Green Deal, the European Green Deal, and so on. And other EU programs, as I said, cover broader areas, including potentially environment and climate. For instance, Horizon Europe is certainly like one of those. Like Horizon Europe supported many areas, especially research areas and innovation across many sectors, including environment and climate action, potentially. Erasmus Plus, you may know it Erasmus is one of the most famous programs of the EU, focuses on education, youth, but now also mobility programs related to the job market. So it goes beyond. It's a revamped version of the old Erasmus. So go and have a look and think about, how the question is phrased. Let's move to question number 5 now. Okay, this is another very interesting type of question. Why? There are many reasons for, as to why this question is particularly interesting. The question is, which country joined the EU area, the euro area, sorry, the euro area, let's pay attention, on 1st of January 2014. Pause the video and have a look at the answers, at the possible answers, if you like. Why is this an interesting question? Because you will get many questions about countries joining. I don't know if many, but you will get questions for sure about the dates of when certain countries joined the EU and possibly when they joined the euro area. And I think that in general, about the dates of when a certain country joined the EU are typically a bit easier to remember. For instance, if you check these dates, you will see that in 2004 there was a huge enlargement and 10 countries joined the European Union. Although some of these 10 countries, I mean, they didn't join the euro area right away. And that is the case of some of these countries in the options. It's interesting to know, I mean, I put them all together, these countries, because if I'm not mistaken, again, go and check, go and double check the relevant sources. All these countries, they joined the EU, the European Union, in 2004, in the same year. But not all these countries joined the euro area on 1st of January 2014. For instance, if you go and have a look, you will see that Estonia joined the euro area in 2011. You will see that Lithuania, and I'm again basing all of this on my memory efforts, Lithuania joined the euro area in 2015. And you will also see that Latvia joined the euro area in 2014. Again, you should pay attention because in 2014 we also had, if I'm not mistaken, Croatia joining the EU. So sometimes, these dates overlap like with other, important dates. And I mean, there you have, I really think, to make an exercise of a memory exercise of recollection. You may build a map. You can check the relevant sources when that is the case. But I mean, you will get quite a lot of these questions. I would say. I mean, I remember getting questions about when Spain joined the EU, when Denmark joined the EU, about whether this or that country is in the euro area or not. You may get questions about Brexit, for instance. So these are very relevant geopolitical questions that also help you understand the EU history much, much better. Let's move to question 6. Here I wanted to, let's say, approach a topic and a policy area, which is a quite relevant one, which is the area of trade and tariffs. And considering that, especially nowadays, we're in a world where the discussions around tariffs are very current, I would not avoid having a look at this type of topics, because maybe this interest in all these tariffs conflicts, they sparked also an interest in the EPSO people, and they may want to include questions around tariffs and in general about the trade policy of the European institutions, because the trade policy is also one of the most important competencies of the European institutions, the European Union. Like, it's an exclusive competence, and trade, it's an important topic. It's an important field, and especially because the generalized scheme of preferences, it's an important scheme which was introduced in one of these years. Think about it. And it was important because it granted developing countries preferential access to EU markets. And how did he grant it? He granted it by lowering tariffs on many experts, on a number of experts. And especially now, if you follow the FTAs, the free trade agreements discussions that the EU is having with many third countries, this is very relevant. Like, for instance, you may have heard that the EU concluded an FTA with India, which is right now a huge trading partner. Like, it's probably, in terms of economy, top 5 economy in the world, projected to be a top 2 possibly economy in the world in the next 10 and 15 years. So I think that questions about tariffs, trade, and stuff like the generalized scheme of preferences may very well be in the cards. And yeah, you know, I mean, it's also important to understand what the generalized scheme of preferences is, because the objective was to support at that time economic development, and then also help developing countries to integrate into the global trading system, which is something that the EU keeps doing. And of course, the scheme has developed over time and now includes different regimes. For instance, at one point you will see, if you read about it, that it was called Generalized Scheme of Preferences Plus, like Erasmus Plus. So you will see these denominations more and more. And it provided additional preferences for countries implementing international conventions or on issues that are very close to European hearts, like human rights, labor rights, environmental protection, and so on and so forth. And to give you the correct answer here, again, I think that I put B in many answers. Hopefully I didn't do it throughout the whole questionnaire, but it was introduced first in 1971. Moving to question number 7, sorry. And this is about a specific policy area. It's about digital. Which of the following is not, pay attention to the negative questions when you go through this test, pay attention. Which of the following is not a priority of the EU's Digital Europe program? First of all, again, as I said before, I would go and check what the EU's Digital Europe program is. And then you will realize like how I would go about a similar type of question and about the answers. First of all, if you have a look at the answers, at the possible answers, you will see, and in fact, I mean, that's why you see, I mean, there is a not, like pay attention to the not. You will realize that of these 4 possible answers, 3, like I would say 3 of them are closer when it comes to, if I were to group them in a cluster or in a set, I would see them as quite closer. Why? I mean, the question is asking about, as I said, digital, right? You know, Digital Europe. So I would think about digital issues, developing digital capacities, and the Digital Europe program. If you look at it, you will understand that it focuses on strengthening Europe's digital capacities. And the main areas in which the program aims at strengthening EU's digital capacities is high-performance computing, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and advanced digital skills. So now you basically have the answer. But I mean, these areas are all, in my view, linked. So I mean, if you use some logic, you will realize. And whereas telecommunications, and here I mean you will see answer D, mobile coverage beyond 5G. Telecommunications infrastructure and telecommunications, like mobile coverage, is typically addressed through other EU policies, like for instance the connectivity policies, the connectivity initiatives, or like funding under, for instance, cohesion policies. And I mean, you will realize if you do some of these tests at EPSO or like any EU institutions where there are also internal competitions, and I did also some internal competitions, they often include one option which belongs to a different policy area. So here, I think that by exclusion, you would relatively easily get to the, to the right answer. Question number 8. What is the main objective of the European Investment Bank? So you will get, again, as I said, quite a number of questions about the role of the European institutions, the role of the European agencies, and the role of, any European entity which gravitates around the EU framework. The European Investment Bank is not an EU institution. You should know that. But what does it do? What does the European Investment Bank do? I mean, you should also know where the European Investment Bank is based. It's based in Luxembourg, I can tell you. And typically, the European Investment Bank provides long-term financing for projects, for EU projects, for projects that support EU policies. For instance, it can be infrastructure development, climate, like environmental goals, innovation, we mentioned digital, also regional development. They have a very broad, let's say, scope, and it's owned by EU member states. The European Investment Bank is owned by EU member states, and so it's basically, I mean, some people call it the EU's lending institution because it's a bank, like it lends. And pay attention because sometimes it can be confused with other financial institutions, not to be confused with the European Central Bank. If you make that mistake, I think you're really on the wrong path. I mean, that would be a very serious issue. As I said, you should check what are the EU institutions, and the European Central Bank is located somewhere else. It's located in Frankfurt, and it's the institution that deals with the monetary policy of the EU area, and it's also responsible for supervising significant banks. There is a so-called single supervisory mechanism within the banking union, and the European Central Bank is responsible for that. So it's quite a different role compared to the European Investment Bank. And now that I told you all of that, you will very easily get to the response, which is C, as I said, because the European Investment Bank deals with funding projects that support EU policy objectives. So again, if you understand the role, if you know about the role, you will get there without necessarily, by just having a look at the answers, or like excluding at least 50% of the answers. Then a question, I think it's quite an important topic, the European Green Deal. I mean, it was like one of the priorities of the previous mandate. We still have some follow-ups of that European Green Deal also in the current political mandate. I mean, still sustainability is quite an issue, and the European Green Deal is a long-term project. And as you see from the possible answers, I'm asking here, we're asking, what is the main objective of the European Green Deal? I can't remember, probably rephrased it. I had some notes, as I said, from my past exams and the questions I had about the main purpose, the main objective of the European Green Deal. I can't probably remember by heart how the question was phrased and all the options. But bottom line is, what is the main objective? And if you look at the possible answers, you will easily understand what the European Green Deal is about. But there, I would again invite you to use your logic. And why? You have 4 options here. I would say that probably 2 are plausible, and another 2 are, I would say, a very long shot. At least look at the first one. Make the EU climate neutral by 2030. Do you think it's realistic? We're in 2026. You think it's realistic that in 4 years from now, the EU would be climate neutral? And of course, you can say, okay, but sometimes, the targets and the objectives of these EU programs are postponed and then changed. But, if they ask you these questions, it's, I would think you should expect, the answer to be quite aligned with the current political scenario and also the legislative scenario. So I would already pick out the answer A. And also, I think personally that if you if we talk about eliminating fossil fuels by 2040, like 14 years from now, eliminating completely, I mean, eliminating in my head means eradicating, like deleting, in all possible ways. 14 years, I mean, I think it's still quite unreasonable. You can argue, of course, around all possible options, all possible aims and objectives. But in any case, I mean, you should know. I mean, is also where dates come into play. And if you read about the European Green Deal, you will see that there are several dates that are indicated. 2050 is, let's say one of the envisaged final dates for the European Green Deal, and in this case also to make the EU climate neutral by 2015. Yeah, you have also 2030 coming out quite often when it comes to let's say temporary or like transitional objectives. But I mean, the main focus of this question here is what is the main objective of the European Green Deal, and the main objective is to make the EU climate neutral by 2050. Let's say it also correctly so that you can make the EU climate neutral by 2050. Let's move on. Question 10. Another question which I remember like 2022 when I really was 2021, I think 2022 I was really in the very much focusing and like in studying these exams. Like at that time I was not an official yet. I was working as a temporary for the European Commission, and I was preparing these competitions, and I got a lot of questions about the so-called RRF, Recovery and Resilience Facility. So this is an important instrument. This is an important instrument which you should know about. It was not only important during that specific time, which was right after the COVID-19 crisis. It was also important because it was the main financial instrument of what was called at that time Next Generation EU. And I mean, it was very important because it provided grants and loans in a period which was particularly stressful for the whole EU economy, for the whole EU society, because of the crisis which originated from the COVID-19. It provided grants and loans, especially to member states, to support reforms, to support investments, to support the development of areas like digitalization, green transition, resilience, and the modernization of the public sector. So it was certainly not about financing EU enlargement and defense cooperation. I think that if you know a bit of recovery and resilience, of the Recovery and Resilience Facility and the Next Generation EU, which you should know about. I mean, I think that this question is dating back to the time 2021, 2023. But you may still get it, in my view, because it's not long ago, and I think the Next Generation EU, which the Recovery and Resilience Facility was part of. It deployed over a multi-annual financial framework over like multiple years. So I think, these big EU programs that lasted many years, like also some of the Horizon programs, you should know about them because they are very important for the EU development, not only at that time but also right now. And so here, I explained what the RRF, Recovery and Resilience Facility, is. And so the correct answer would be B, supporting member states' recovery after the COVID-19 crisis. So think about it. Again, here you have, I think, very easily a couple of answers that you can pick out quite confidently. if you know about it. And sometimes, I mean, you know, EPSO and the institutions, they give you very similar answers, but pay attention to the way that these possible answers are phrased. Question 11, we're moving to the end of this test, and remember to pause the video for a few seconds if you want and think through the question and the options for maybe 30 seconds before trying to give an option. RescEU, another important program which was conceived quite recently. What does it establish? You have several options. Here, and I would say, again, I mean, the options in you will see, I mean, some of the options are quite close. And you know, reconstruction fund for natural disasters, joint EU disaster insurance scheme, emergency equipment and medical supplies. So we are talking about, you know, emergency situations here, like unusual situations. So sometimes it can be tricky. Permanent EU Civil Protection Army. There, I think that you have a clue to know that to know which answer at least I would exclude, because there is no European army at the moment, and there was not, for instance, for sure in the past. So you know it, you should know it, and then you can exclude already an answer, and you can move to the other ones. And amongst the other ones, RescEU, think about also the word, like the actual wording of the specific program. RescEU reminds me of rescuing, right? Like rescuing something. So also think through that when you are trying to get to the possible answer. And sometimes when the answers are a bit more detailed, but in a way that makes sense, I have to say, based on my experience, they are the correct ones. But in a way that makes sense, I said, because sometimes it's unnecessarily, I would say, detailed. If it's unnecessarily detailed, I would take them out. But in this case, one of the options is a strategic EU stockpile of emergency equipment and medical supplies, and that is again the correct answer for this question. So it's not a reconstruction fund for natural disasters and not a joint EU disaster insurance scheme. And we have now question 12, which is, which of the following best describes the objective of the farm to fork strategy? This is another recently adopted, you can say, EU program, farm to fork strategy. Don't disregard questions and topics concerning agriculture and farming, because first of all, I mean, that's a very big chunk of the EU policies, agricultural policy, and also of the EU funding. You may not believe it, but when it comes to EU funding, and if you look at the figures that the EU deploys and employs for funding, you know, the agricultural sector across member states, if you look at the figures, as I said, you would realize that in most budgetary situations, like multi-annual financial frameworks, in most scenarios, funding which goes directly or indirectly to the agricultural sector is one of the biggest amounts across all areas. Like in some cases, even 1/3 of the whole EU budget ends up to funding, agricultural projects. So that's very important, especially in a sustainability perspective, which is like the world we're living in, and one of the most important EU policy areas. And again, also here, you have options that, they talk about food, EU food, the EU food system, agriculture, you have, options that make sense and options that make more sense. Like, for instance, would you think that eliminating agricultural imports, from third countries would make sense uh, uh, in the EU? I mean, we don't want to procure any agricultural imports from third countries. Would you say it makes sense? Of course not, right? Like, again, I mentioned the free trade agreements earlier, and if you look at the recently signed free trade agreement between the EU and India, you will see that there are specific provisions on agriculture, because that's very important, and we have also in the EU a huge interest in having healthy and good agricultural imports, and creating a single EU market for agricultural land. What does it mean? I mean, apparently on form it may make sense, but in substance it doesn't really make sense. So in the end, also in this case, I basically gave you an answer, which is answer B. I think that I had B in many cases. The farm to fork strategy is a component, as I said, of the European Green Deal, and aims to make the EU food system more sustainable. In few words. So now that we went through the many questions, my question to you would be, how many questions did you get right? And I would say that out of these 12 questions that I'm proposing you in today's tutorial, if you got 8 or more right, you are already doing pretty well. Although, as I said, it's a competition, so you should do your best to score as much as possible, as high as possible. If you did less than 8, I mean, don't get desperate. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but you need to put some work. Also, because I think that I came out with a list of questions which were as diverse as possible. I included questions on the EU institutions, on the EU policies. As I said, all these questions, they come from a personal database that I have collected. I have many. I think more than 200 questions that I collected through the years in the context of these tests, which are useful. Were useful for me also to understand what I could be asked or what I could not be asked, but as I said, also to study and focus and understand more and more about certain EU topics, because at one point you don't even need to know that, for instance, they asked a question about farm to fork strategy. You just know what farm to fork strategy is, and you have the answer right away. That's the principle. I mean, that's the approach that you should embrace, in my view. I also told you that I would be sharing some pro tips for this test. And my first pro tip, which if you followed this far, you will have understood already, is to read the question and the answers extremely carefully. Read the question and the answers, because often the key to the question is not the question itself, but the exact wording of the answers. Of course, the question itself can give you hints. Like, for instance, if it's a negative question, pay a lot of attention, because negative questions sometimes are phrased in order to trick you. But sometimes questions, they use adverbs, and you may want to understand why they used that adverb for. And like I also said, read the answers, because as I said, and we saw it in some of these options that we looked at, the wording of the answers can tell you a lot. It can it can create confusion between different institutions, like Council of the European Union or European Council. I mean, they may confuse you with that, right? Or like Council of Europe, or like subtle wording differences, which I'm sure I also showed some during this tutorial. Or also the use, that's another very common example, like the very common situation, the use of absolute terms. Terms like always, only, all. Sometimes when these terms sound too categorical, there is a trick. And I would say, in my experience, when answers include two categorical terms like these ones, they are often incorrect, in my experience. Again, I don't want to mislead you, but that is my experience. The second pro tip, and again, we covered it already, eliminate incorrect answers first. We saw it. I mean, if you have 4 options and you eliminate already one, like, but 2, I mean, 2 would be great already. Again, if you eliminate 2, you have another 2, and basically, even if you don't know it, you have 50% chances to guess the right answer. And always try to guess, even if you don't know the answer, try to guess, because you're not losing points. You're not losing points if you get the wrong answer. But if you pick the right answer, you are gaining 1 point. So if you identify wrong answers, like, or incorrect answers, you identify them and you remove them. Like, you also, I think that in the test there is also like a strike through option to kind of also visually eliminate the wrong answers from the available options. And then you can choose the remaining 2. And maybe, I mean, then this again increases your probability of success from 25 to 50 to possibly 75%. Who knows? 100%. If you know that, you know, there are 3 wrong answers, and this can make a significant difference in EPSO tests. So really read through the answers very carefully and try to eliminate the wrong ones. And the third pro tip, which is, I mean, to me, the most important, because I really learned it the hard way. At the beginning, I mean, I was a bit skeptical, but then I realized that is very much the case, is to use logic and common sense, and sometimes knowledge that you already have. Even if you don't have a lot of knowledge about EU policies and institutions, you have a lot of general knowledge about any topic in culture, like in general topics, like even if you read newspapers, or like you have a specialization in a certain field, you already have some knowledge. And you can use logic to, to guide you through the questions and through the answers. And also, I mean, bear in mind that your intuition, sometimes, if you use logic, may actually be correct. Many questions can really be solved by simply asking whether the answer makes sense. And so in this respect, I would really look for answers that are, as I said, unnecessarily complicated, unrealistic in practice. And we've seen a couple, I think, of the previous ones, like eliminating agricultural imports from third countries. As I said, I rephrased some of the possible answers. I mean, I remember the topic. I can't guarantee 100% on all the possible answers. I mean, I can't remember. I don't have enough good memory for that. But you will see that some answers sometimes are unrealistic in practice. Or, even more, they are inconsistent with EU basic principles. So go and have a look at the EU basic principles. For instance, if you're a lawyer, you will know that there is a principle, an EU principle, which is about the primacy of EU legislation. And because of this primacy, you may know that, for instance, member states' laws in certain fields, they cannot overrule EU law. So if you have, for instance, a question asking you about, a specific law in a member state legislation which, replaced, so to say, I'm just assuming, replaced like an EU legislative act, I mean, you already understand, I mean, that is inconsistent with basic EU principles. I'm just assuming, but I mean, this is just to give you an example. Like, for instance, about the European Green Deal, that the main objective is about the EU making it climate neutral by 2050. So you already know that, that is the principle of the policy framework, and you have to stick to it. And so there will not be, in principle, a 2070. So if you have a policy within the European Green Deal that is, envisaging it deploying by 2070, you already tick it out. So use logic and common sense. As I said, there are certainly other tips that I that sometimes, you know, I came out with, and I will try to share them as much as possible in this channel, or in the context of future interactions. I also considered, for instance, doing a live with Q&As and questions about this, because some people also asked me. So yeah, I mean, drop whatever you have in the comments. I may also do a second edition of this video with further questions, because as I said, I collected quite a number of questions, and again, I'm sharing them in my personal capacity based on my recollection of the topics that I encountered in the past. I'm not saying in any possible way that these questions correspond to EPSO questions. I'm saying that they are EPSO-like. As I said, I want to give this disclaimer again once more. They are EPSO-like. These topics were covered during previous tests in the past. I tried to be as close as possible to the questions I got during the years. I can't guarantee on the actual wording, even less on the possible answers. But you know, bottom line, these are for sure topics that you may encounter. I hope that this was as useful as possible for your preparation. As I said, I may want to do other videos in the future if that is useful for any of you guys, and that is if that makes, you know, this type of test easier, or the preparation for this type of test any easier. I mean, the goal, as I said in my channel, one of the goals is also to make this type of career, this type of path, as accessible as possible for people like I was like when I was younger. In the end, like I come from an island in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, and I didn't have access to these things before. You know, I put my head and I smashed my head on the wall for years and years and years, and then I finally understood what I had to do to make it happen. And yeah, I'm doing my best to help as many of you as possible. And so again, very grateful if you enjoyed this video, if you found it useful in any possible way. If you like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. That is the best way to support my YouTube journey and to push me to provide even more content. To the next one, I can only say for now, and as usual, peace.